What is up, everybody? How y'all doing today? We are just going to be talking about this book right here, Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Oh my gosh. I'm not even gonna waste any time right here. Let's just get right on in. So first of all, this book is amazing. Second of all, if you've been with me for the whopping 2 weeks that I've been here back on YouTube, you will probably notice that this is my first of an upcoming many book reviews. Since this is my first time, I'm just going to take a minute to describe the structure that I'm going to take on these book reviews going forward. There will be some timestamps down in the description box, but I'm going to begin every review with a spoiler-free review for those of you who might just be interested in the book and not want to know any of the finer details as to what happens. You can totally skip straight to that right now if you don't want to hear any of the other descriptions about what I'm going to do for future book reviews, but timestamp will be there for that. The other timestamp will lead you to the spoiler-filled section when I'm basically just going to embellish on what I've said in the spoiler-free review with just some more details as to things that have like really affected me or blown my mind or things that I want to talk about, as opposed to a completely new review just filled with all the spoilers. There will also be a link in the description box to my corresponding website where you can find the typed up version of the spoiler-free review, spoiler-filled review, as well as a chapter-by-chapter breakdown of my reaction as I read the book. All of the spoilers are hidden until you click on them, so don't worry. You don't have any chance of randomly finding any information that you don't want to unless you just enjoy pressing on buttons that say spoilers for the fun of it. This particular book is also one of 5 books that I've chosen specifically for a project that I'm going to be doing on this channel. As of the recording and publication of this video, I have yet to officially announce that. It'll be next Thursday for those of you who are watching, but if you're here anytime past October 2020, it's not going to be hard at all to figure out what I'm talking about. While you're down in that description box, be sure to hit that subscribe button followed by that bell notification so you can be updated anytime I post a new book review, or if you want to hear about this project I just mentioned or any upcoming projects or book reviews, anything in the future. I'm going to have enough videos covering the why and the how of how I chose this and those other books, so I'm not going to spend time on that here. I've also just relaunched my personal channel, and that includes my reading vlog, so if you would like to see my thought process as I'm reading it, that will also be linked in the description box for that vlog over there. I still haven't decided if I want the reading vlog from that channel to be on this channel or not, but that's not really a topic that I'm going to be getting into today. As of now, if you are interested in that particular vlog, it is in the description box. I'm not going to be reviewing every book I ever read, because then that's just going to make this all too crazy, even if y'all wanted me to do that, but my reading vlogs will definitely be the place to go if you're interested in all things that I'm reading. Also, I'm so sorry that I'm like sweaty. It's just hot today. I can't help it. That takes care of all the business, so if you haven't already pressed the timestamp to get you to the review, it is officially time to actually get right on in. Okay, so seriously, what an incredible book. I sincerely agree with all of the hype about this book right now. It is totally well worth the read. This book is actually a prime example of why I always give books at least 50 pages after I start them, because at the very beginning I was a little bit iffy about this and I wasn't really sure if I was gonna like it or not. In my little chapter by chapter notes, I'm pretty sure on page like 36 I wrote that I wasn't really sure how it was gonna go, but then literally by page I think 52 I was like, oh my gosh, my mind is totally made up. This is actually really awesome. A couple of, I hope, spoiler-free things that I'm going to say before I really get into this review, because these are 2 things that I did not know about this book that I kind of wish that I had before I started. It might have just made it a little bit easier to get through those 50 pages if I had known. And like I said, if this is a spoiler, I'm so sorry, but I'm just gonna say them anyway. Number 1, I did not know that this book was written as a journal. And number 2, I did not know that this book was so philosophical. Neither of those points are bad at all. It's just that both of them took me a second to adjust to, just because I didn't know that before I went in. The journal aspect of it all is obviously the easiest thing to adjust to between those two. I was over here thinking that this was going to be some sort of whimsical, fantastical adventure. I mean, thinking along the lines of the movie Labyrinth or even Pan's Labyrinth. Just the plot about all the labyrinths and the statues and all of the everything like that. I just thought it was going to be some sort of adventure like that. But where I had expected some whimsical Muppet type fantasy, I guess. What I ended up with turned out to be more like the Tao of Pooh. If anyone's ever read that book, it's essentially taking the characters of Winnie the Pooh and utilizing them to both depict and describe Taoist philosophy. That is a far cry away from a book about running through labyrinths and running away from scary monsters. I knew, based on some of the brief glimpses of reviews that I had seen, even though I was trying to avoid a lot of those because I wanted to kind of not know much about this going into it, which might have also, I might have learned these two things I didn't know if I had read those, but I didn't. I knew that it was supposedly a good depiction of isolation, especially after we have all just gone through quarantine this year. I just didn't really understand what that meant. Like, if this was actually supposed to be about quarantine, or if it was just kind of a random happenstance. Another thing I would like to mention, for those of you who do not know, as I did not when I first started reading this book, is that Giovanni Battista Piranesi was actually an Italian artist back in the 1700s, who is most known for his fictitious depictions of Roman prisons. There's no direct mention of that in this book, but it essentially just kind of feels like this character is trapped in one of those paintings. Part of what makes this book so interesting, though, is that depiction of the isolation and the quarantine thing, and I really do think that it came as a random stroke of luck for Susanna Clarke, because the thing is, it has been a long time since she has published anything, with her most notable work being 2004's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and she published something after that, but it's been a long time since even that, and now that I've read this, I guess I kind of understand why. It is pretty evident that some major thought went into this book, and it would not surprise me at all if it took her a few years just to figure out how to structure this thing. I'm also pretty sure everything from this book was done and dusted by the time this whole quarantine thing actually happened, and although I still think that this book would do great without that, I think that the fact that that's all just happened to everybody is what is making everybody who reads this just have that kind of whoa reaction, because now it's something that we all really understand. Ugh, this is seriously just like the hardest book to review without giving away any details as to the what and the whys and the how all of this stuff goes down. Oh my gosh. But what I can say about this book is it's an incredible look into the human mind. What it means to exist, what it means to have memories, the very idea of like trust and identity, and yeah, isolation, loneliness. But through all of that, desire and longing and searching for something that is different than the present but greater than the past. It seriously is just such a trip to read, and it is not an easy read. This is not just one to speed through because it's short. I read it in a day, but I read it in a day, not just a couple of hours. You really do have to turn your brain on for this book. Sincerely worth it if you go into it with the mentality of trying to find some self-reflection through this main character. There are a few things in here that remain unanswered for me, but I also think that it's purposeful. I think that it's purposefully trying to allow the reader to create this world in whatever unique way they feel and however it just responds to their head. I don't really know how else to say that. But without giving it all away, this is like the hardest book to describe. But the prose here is very beautiful. It is so beautifully written, very reminiscent of like a Hemingway or C.S. Lewis, which she also quoted at the beginning of the book, and I was happy about that quote because it was from The Magician's Nephew, which, as a Narnia fan, it was just nice to see a reference that wasn't simply the lion, the witch, and the wardrobe, but she has, "I am the great scholar, the magician, the adept, who is doing the experiment. Of course, I need subjects to do it on," from The Magician's Nephew. It's all just so beautifully written and so engaging, but it certainly requires some active attention, because it's seriously like you can blink and just miss so much that's going on in this book. There's so much finite detail, like all these depictions of the statues and everything else that's going on in these halls. I'm just at a loss. Like, it really is just so incredible. I cannot say enough good things about this book. I may have to read it again, but I'm just afraid that if I do that, I'm also gonna have to review it again because I'm gonna have like all these extra opinions after I already know what's going on. But all of that being said, I am actually now about to start in on some spoilers. So if this is your time to bounce before the tea spills, just make sure that you leave me a comment down below to let me know what any kind of expectation you might have for this book, or if you have read it and you want to let me know how you think or how it differed from what you expected. Just let me know down in the comments, and while you're there, just make sure to hit that little subscribe button followed by the notification bell so you can stick with me on my journeys henceforth. But if this is your time to bounce, I will give you a second before... Okay though, seriously guys, this book is seriously incredible. Even though this is the spoilers section, I still don't even know where to start. I have so many questions, but that's also what I was just trying to say about how I think that that's purposeful. I think that the reader is supposed to have all these open-ended questions, to think of things for themselves. It's all just so wild. So Piranesi is really Matthew Rose Sorensen, and he's in a cave, I think. It's like somewhere in the ocean, I think, and the halls are like a sea cave, and waves come in and out and flood everything, but somehow he always remains untouched. And I don't know, so he's disappeared from the real world because he's been writing this book about some guy named Lawrence Arne Siles, I think is how you say his name. Arne Siles, I'm not sure. But he's essentially Ted Bundy meets David Koresh from that Waco thing meets like a really messed up Freud. And he's basically just capturing all of these people and exploring the idea of entering other worlds through these little rituals. And then anyone who ends up like writing about him, including Matthew Rose Sorensen, just mysteriously disappears. And then they call Matthew Rose Sorensen Piranesi because that is a name that is associated with labyrinths, which is just another, that's the most direct reference to the artist that depicted all of these prisons that it seems like he's trapped in. And then once Matthew, or Piranesi, or whatever you want to call him, actually gets to this cave or this house or whatever it actually is, he just goes on this search for like the great knowledge, just over and over. And that really is the most like clear examination of the mind and thought and how thought processes work. He's like always on the hunt for truth and understanding, and she utilizes all of these capitals to make that philosophical point really drive home. He just forgets everything about the real world, and then that's when the whole idea of an examination of a mental breakdown comes into play. And that was kind of briefly discussed at the end of the book, but it's also what just left me feeling a little bit like, was this real? Or was this Matthew Rose Sorensen guy just like trapped in his own mind in a hospital? I'm not sure, and that's part of what makes this a little bit confusing. And there's also this Dr. Ketterly character whom Piranesi, I say Piranesi a lot but Piranesi. So the other is who Piranesi refers to because he thinks that the only people in existence are him and this other person who is the doctor. He also, however, has this weird interaction with the victims from Arne Siles. And then there's this whole thing about statues and how statues are perfect, eternal, and never subject to decay. So he thinks that it's himself, Piranesi, this other, the doctor, the 13 dead people, and then 16 who ends up being the police officer who comes to rescue him. But he thinks that those are the only people who have ever existed. But the police officer who saves him is also part of what confuses me so much about whether or not this is real, because she says that she's shown the trail to the labyrinth, and which is how she comes to save Matthew Sorensen. But then it also seems like it's all happened in his head. But then Dr. Ketterly also disappears when Matthew Rose Sorensen reappears, and he has died in the actual text. So I'm not really sure. Except for it all also could be happening within like a hospital type situation that's just not supposed to exist, which would make some of that connect a little bit more. But that's also the exact thing that I'm trying to say about how I think that it's purposefully written like that for the reader to start to make those connections and fill in those gaps for themselves. There's so many layers to it, so many realms of thought, and so many ideas on the existence of reality and the human mind and memories, and then also the idea of our memories being played with and the process of determining whether or not the information given to us is true or false. And it was just so intricately well done, and I'm just really pleased with the final outcome of this book. So even though I might have ruined it for you if you did watch these spoilers and you haven't read it yet for yourself, I still highly recommend giving this experience a try for yourself. I really might read this again, but not because I feel like I have to understand it, but more just because I really feel like it's one of those books that once you do know what's going on, when you come back to revisit it, it's all just so enhanced because you start to see how everything is really connected together. Like even reading that Magician's Nephew quote right now, that was the first time I had reread that since I read the book, and even reading it I'm like, oh my gosh, I know exactly why she picked that quote. So it's just one of those books that it's just like everything, every sentence, every comma, every word is specifically chosen. And the first time you're reading this, you're really just so stuck in the like, what is happening, that I just think knowing what I know, that a reread of it would be just a completely different experience. But then like I said, I'm just afraid I'd have to review it, and I don't really know. Ain't nobody got time for that right now. But if you have read this book, or if you've watched through all of these spoilers, again, just leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. And if you've read it, how did your expectations change? Because like I said at the beginning, I had no idea that this was a journal and a philosophical book. Like this fawn up here on the front, like I literally thought that it was gonna be some sort of like fantasy, like let's just detach and go for fun. No, you must think, and you must think a lot in this book, but it's totally worth it. So let me know what you thought of it if you read it for yourself. If you haven't, again, totally highly recommend. So yeah, let me know in the comments what you think about this book, and make sure you come back next Thursday to figure out what this project I was talking about is in regard to why I chose this and 4 other books. But if you're again here past October 2020, all of that is totally going to make sense. Expect one at least every Sunday of October, but from there I'm just not really sure. It's just gonna depend on if I have any good books that I want to read, but we'll just take things as they come. See you on Tuesday.